Election night 2025, a virtual sweep by Democrats across the country. But how big of a deal is that? This wasn't a race for president or even for congressional seats. Still, some believe it is a warning shot to Republicans that they are massively losing on the very issues they won on just 1 year ago. Hi everyone, and thanks for joining the channel again. Democrats are celebrating major victories across the country last night. However, it's important to keep them in perspective as Republicans are trying to quiet the noise about the danger they're in 1 year from now. We'll begin with the races for governor in Virginia and New Jersey, the latter probably being the one many considered to be the closest race of the night, and it was anything but, as the Democratic candidate easily defeating the Republican by a whopping 13 points, double digits, despite a very contentious campaign of back and forth bickering. The same thing in Virginia, which turned out to be a near 15-point victory. These wide margins of victory were expected in the race for New York City mayor, where Democratic socialist Zohran Mamdani staved off a challenge from Democrat turned independent former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. And the other big win of the night, the California Proposition 50, which shows a 2-to-1 margin agreeing to redistrict the state in order to give Democrats more seats. Democratic leaders in California say they don't want to do this, but they feel that they have no choice because Texas is also doing the same at the request of President Trump in order to win Republicans more seats in the critical midterms next year. President Trump sounding off quite a bit this morning, and overnight as well for that matter, both on camera and on Truth Social, trying to not only tamper the significance of the Democrat wins, but also to absolve him from any responsibility.
I think if you read the pollsters, the shutdown was a big factor, negative for the Republicans, and that was a big factor. And they say that I wasn't on the ballot was the biggest factor. But I don't know about that, but I was honored that they said that.
Now, while the president might see it that way, it appears in many cases the voters did not. For instance, in New Jersey and Virginia, the top issue for Democratic voters was the economy. That was the number one issue for Republicans just a year ago. So both parties obviously trying to accentuate the victory or play damage control. Democrats saying this is a clear sign that President Trump's policies are not only not working, but they are actively hurting the American people, and it gives them further momentum to take back the House and Senate in the midterms next year. Republicans trying to do damage control, saying this is an off year, turnout isn't that high, it doesn't reflect what will happen in a midterm election, and that this was only about specific issues. Well, one of the biggest issues of the night was the economy, and a lot of voters who feel that President Trump is not only not helping the economy, but actively hurting it through his tariffs and his actions and inactions during the ongoing government shutdown.
We are in the midst of a disastrous Democrat-created government shutdown, and it is Democrat-created, but I don't think they're getting really the blame that they should. That's now officially the longest shutdown in American history. The Democrat radicals in the Senate have shown zero interest in reopening the government.
And there is some truth to this. In many cases, or in many past administrations, presidents in their first year often don't really shoulder a lot of the blame because they're still getting their legislation going. But this is different this time. President Trump has enacted more executive actions with virtually no challenges from Congress. And so his policies and proposals were implemented much faster, especially on the economic front, than any other president in the modern era since Franklin Roosevelt. Now, that means that when you claim that this is the Biden economy, in many cases that's falling on deaf ears because the trends towards lower inflation and increased wages have reversed under President Trump since his tariff policies began to take effect earlier this year. Now, there is also some truth to what Republicans are saying. This is a relatively small sample size and doesn't necessarily reflect the rest of the country. But it does show that polls are confirming what Americans are feeling across the country, and that is the economy is getting worse, and most in fact, in these polls, are blaming President Trump and the Republicans on the shutdown and the pain from the shutdown. Most surveyed are blaming President Trump and the Republicans. These are losing battles in the one sector you don't want to be losing battles on, and that is people's pocketbooks. If you damage people's bottom line, they will not vote for you. And that played out for Republicans this year. And the fear among the GOP is it will play out once again on a wider scale next year. One other criticism the Republican Party has been throwing out there focuses on the New York City mayor-elect Zohan Mamdani, who is an open democratic socialist. Many saying that he proves that the Democrats have gone too far to the left, are too socialist, and are not American. Well, this isn't really true. Democratic socialism still believes in the power of the vote, but it also believes in policies that basically include wealth distribution and a greater good for all. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, for you fellow Star Trek fans. And these policies are enacted throughout our society, whether it's public safety, whether it's public libraries. Any public institution generally is a form of socialist policy. They've been deemed the greater good for the community, such as public schools and public welfare. Social Security, it's virtually in the name. So socialist policies aren't by definition un-American. In fact, they're quite American. The question is, what is worth the money and what is not? And I would believe that the more that Republicans try and simplify this down to a term, I think it's beginning to fall on deaf ears after cycle of Republicans winning on that argument and nothing getting better. Democrats also walking a tightrope here because the word socialist still doesn't play well in some parts of the country. They're hoping to win back voters. And so not everyone is embracing the democratic socialism of a Zohan Mamdani or a Bernie Sanders. Many are still trying to stay closer to the center. Whether that's a winning strategy, we'll have to see. For instance, here in Iowa, Democrats are hoping to make the state competitive again, both in congressional races as well as the race for governor. Could they gain back some of those seats as well as possibly break the supermajority Republicans now enjoy at the Iowa State House and have enjoyed control for 10 years now? Well, we'll find out a year from now whether that holds true here and for other current Republican strongholds across the country. Now, on top of all of this, we also have the growing battle of redistricting. Generally, states redistrict their congressional districts every decade after the U.S. Census, which is required by the Constitution. Every state determines their districts differently, and in many cases, they're gerrymandered. They're determined by politicians who are looking to kind of give their party an advantage. Other states do it a little bit more fairly, in which they appoint independent commissions to either determine the boundaries or to submit those boundaries to state lawmakers in order to enact. And that is what's drawing a lot of concern. President Trump has requested Texas redraw its boundaries to seemingly give Republicans 5 more seats next year, and they have done so. In response, California asked its voters, they had to do that because of the laws being different there, to allow them to redistrict to add 5 more Democratic seats to the House, presumably next year. Well, they say they're doing that to offset Texas, but that's not stopping the escalation, as the gerrymandering arms race is now spreading to other states, including Indiana and Maryland, among others. We don't know how this will all play out as we head into the midterms, and whether all of these states will get their redistricting done in time for next year's elections. But what we do know is it is a bit of a wild card as we head into trying to determine who has the upper hand. Historically, the party that holds power, especially when it's both in the White House and in Congress, like the Republicans enjoy right now, tend to do worse in the midterms. Republicans suffered heavy losses in the 2018 midterms during President Trump's first term, and many believe this time around it could be far worse. Of course, if you're a supporter of Republicans, there's one simple thing that would help bring voters back to your side, and that's make the economy better. President Trump has failed to do so, and many say that his policies have only made matters worse after years of steady decline in inflation, those numbers now going back up, food prices going back up, and people not really feeling any extra money in their wallet. This, of course, is all leading into a critical holiday season where we've seen major employers now, the last remaining sector to grow jobs in the economy, now cutting hundreds of thousands of jobs over the last couple of months. This could accelerate job losses across the country, but we won't exactly know because we're not getting any more government data due to the government shutdown. However, we do still get private sector data, and it shows significant losses in the jobs over the last 2 months. Will that continue? Will the country fall into a recession? Well, if it does, or it doesn't get much better, you can almost assure yourself that Republicans will suffer heavy losses in November. But if Republicans in Congress and President Trump can enact new legislation and new policies that do boost the economy and do boost people's personal income, you might see that change. But right now, the clear advantage is for Democrats in terms of how they make out in the midterms, and Republicans are the ones now playing defense. Can they hold on to their majorities in the House and Senate? The House seems to be the longest shot, the Senate possibly. But we will find out 1 year from now when voters across the country take part in midterm elections. What do you think about last night's results, and what do you think it means for the midterms? Share with us your comments in the section below, and as always, be sure to subscribe to the channel as we continue to produce more content. Thanks for watching.